Today, I am here to tell you a story. The story of Miquella the Kind. It's a story that other people have told, and it's also a story that's incomplete. I'm aware that other big YouTubers have covered this topic, but I haven't seen those videos, so the conclusions that I draw might be different from theirs, or they could be the same. The conclusions I draw also might be different from yours, and that's fine. These games are intentionally designed with incomplete lore, which allows the player to fill in the gaps with their own imagination, and everyone gets to participate in that process. So, to all of you who also participated in trying to uncover this story, did you also follow the flowers? Did I pick the right music there? Never mind. If I counted correctly, there are 124 Miquella's lilies in Elden Ring, and we're going to visit all of them. I started this process out of curiosity. How many of the lilies are in places that have potential lore implications for Miquella, and how many are in places that are just kind of random? The answer I found is that basically all of them have potential lore implications, as long as you're willing to squint a bit. The exact order of events is hard to pin down, but I'm going to try to tell this story in more or less chronological order as best I can. Our story begins in Leyndell Royal Capital, where I assume Miquella was born. He and his sister Malenia, known as the Twin Prodigies.
The Twin Prodigies, Miquella and Malenia,
were the last of the named demigods to be born to parents Marika and Radagon. Because of this, for some reason, both were born with a curse. Miquella with the curse of eternal childhood, and Malenia with the curse of scarlet rot. But we'll circle back to that. Born during the age of the Erd Tree, well after the establishment of the Golden Order, Miquella's early life in the Golden City must have been idyllic. Marika's prior removal of the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring made all who were blessed with the grace of the Erd Tree functionally immortal. Death and suffering would have been next to non-existent. Miquella thus became a Golden Order fundamentalist. He gifted 2 brand new incantations to his father Radagon, and received one in return. For why would he question the order responsible for the creation of such a perfect city? Miquella also likely studied with the perfumers as a child, if for no other reason than to learn the healing magics that they were so renowned for. There are 5 Miquella's lilies behind the Perfumer HQ in Leyndell, as well as another 5 near a perfume bottle in the area that leads to the Lift of Rold. The Miquella's lily crafting material reads, a delicate water lily of unalloyed gold that has started to fade and wilt, a flower signifying faith in the Halig tree, thought to be beloved by the Empyrean Miquella in his youth. I do not think that Miquella planted all of these flowers himself, but I do think his followers did, and thus perhaps we can assume that most places with a Miquella's lily are places that he has actually been, and that these flowers are likely planted by perfumers, who seem to have been some of Miquella's first loyal followers. There are 2 other things of note near these lilies. The first is the symbol that we see on all of the sealed doors and windows of Leyndell. I'm not entirely sure what this symbol means, but it clearly had an influence on Miquella, as similar patterns will come up frequently along our journey. Hell, even Miquella's hair is in the shape of this symbol. Second is the peculiar statue that can be found in many places throughout the Lands Between. I'm going to call this statue the Gardener. I'm also not sure of the symbolic significance of this, but I am confident that both had an influence on Miquella in his youth. His personal symbol seems to have been influenced by the flowering vine design, and many of the statues depicting Miquella at the Halig tree have similar elements to this Gardener statue. I believe that many of the statues we see in Elden Ring that don't seem to be referenced in the lore are tied to ancient religions which existed before the Erd Tree and have since been long forgotten. But that doesn't fit within this video. One of Miquella's side quests seems to have been studying these ancient religions, attempting to obtain any knowledge that might help him cure his sister's affliction. But more on that later. Miquella may have met each of his demigod half-siblings during his childhood in the Golden City. His half-siblings on his mother's side, Godwyn, Morgott, and Mohg, and his half-siblings on his father's side, Radahn, Rykard, and Ranni. There are other unnamed children of Marika, and even some named ones that we won't talk about till the very end, but these 6 are most important to the story. Of the 6, Morgott and Rykard have the fewest connections to Miquella that I have found. Radahn and Godwyn have some connections, though Radahn's is mostly only visible thanks to information we learned from the Shadows of the Erdtree DLC, which I am going to reference as little as possible. Ranni and Mohg have the largest number of connections to Miquella. It was during this time that Ranni may have taught Miquella basic staff making. I'll cover the evidence for this later. It also may have been during this time that Radahn first promised Miquella to be his consort, if he were to ever become Empyrean. Another crafting material related to Miquella is the nascent butterfly, which reads, "An arcane butterfly with translucent wings. This butterfly appears as if it has just emerged from its cocoon for its entire life. In most areas where there are Miquella's lilies, you can also find nascent butterflies somewhere nearby. I won't be dealing with these as exhaustively as the flowers, but they are sometimes relevant. I'll leave discovering the full lore implications of the butterflies to someone else. In the sewers below the capital, there are nascent butterflies at a grate that separates the deeper part of the sewers from the part most easily accessible from the capital streets. This, if anywhere, is where Miquella would have first encountered Morgott and Mohg. Another set of twins, Morgott and Mohg, were also born cursed, as omen covered in many horns. Normal children born as omen would have their horns cut off, usually leading to their deaths, but noble omen were instead confined to the sewers, out of sight from the rest of society. Morgott might not have had much to say to Miquella, aside from protect the Erdtree, given that he was also a Golden Order fundamentalist. But Mohg would have delighted in whispering blasphemies into young Miquella's ears, attempting to turn him away from the Golden Order. But Miquella's faith was stronger than Mohg's deceit, and his belief in the Golden Order would continue for a while longer.
Dearest Miquella.
Before we venture with Miquella out of the Golden City to explore Altus Plateau, we need to talk about the elephant in the room. Saint Trina. Saint Trina is Miquella, but more of a second personality than an alias. Saint Trina is capable of communicating with people through their dreams, and I am not going to be talking about Saint Trina very much, for 2 reasons. First, I don't really understand all of the lore around Saint Trina. And last, there are Saint Trina's lilies everywhere in this game, and I am not going to all of them. Everywhere except for Caelid. Again, someone else can figure that out. But anyway, there are 2 major conclusions that I have reached about Saint Trina that are relevant to this video. Number 1, Miquella himself probably crafted all the Saint Trina items. And 2, Miquella's connection to Saint Trina weakened over time, especially after a certain event. But more on that later. Miquella was a master craftsman, as we will discover, and one of the first things that I think he might have crafted was the Spirit Calling Bell. This item is visually similar to the sword and torch of Saint Trina, all of which appear to be partially made of silver, which is a common element of the items that Miquella crafted in his youth. Another example of this is the Red Branch Shortbow, which drops from pages and reads, "Shortbow of polished red wood, fashioned by a master craftsman, wielded by pages." It was through the Spirit Calling Bell that Miquella may have met Torrent, our mount in the game. He would later devise a ring whistle to allow him to summon Torrent anywhere at any time, but as Torrent is a spirit horse, I think it makes sense that the bell would have enabled Torrent and Miquella to meet for the first time. Young Miquella seems to have had a love of exploration. A lily can be found in each of the 4 corners of Altus Plateau, indicating that he explored far and wide. Miquella also seems to have had a fondness for cliffs, as his less significant flowers can often be found at the tops of them. A lily can be found atop a cliff east of Leyndell, with literally nothing nearby, except a spirit spring. Given that spirit springs exist specifically to interact with Torrent, I choose to assume that they were also created by Miquella. He didn't personally place every spirit spring, obviously, but maybe this was the first one. It certainly won't be the last one we find along our journey. Miquella would eventually make his way to the far side of the plateau, to the Erd-tree-gazing hill area, where he encountered something that he might never have seen before: unhappy people. We can find 4 lilies at the Lux ruins, where demi-human queen Gillica is found. Like all the demi-human queens, Gillica wields the demi-human queen's staff, which actually drops from the queen in the Weeping Peninsula, but it may still be relevant. This is another item that looks like it might be made from silver. The staff reads, "Glintstone staff styled as a scepter, a gift once given to the demi-humans to foster peace. It can be wielded even by those of low intelligence, sneered at by fools in the academy." If you look closely, you can see that the staff is covered in vine-like patterns. This is one of the more tenuous connections I'll make, as aside from the staff, I found no other strong links between Miquella and demi-humans, but more about Miquella's potential staff making later. Much more significant is the nearby Perfumer's Ruins, where 10 entire lilies can be found. Here, Miquella would have encountered the Misbegotten, and the Omen if he did not already know about them from Morgott and Mohg. The important part of these ruins is not what's above them, but what's beneath them. I don't think there's a strong connection between Miquella and the Omen Killer faction, only with the original Perfumers. Perfumers like Trisha. Perfumer Trisha is the boss of the unsightly catacombs, which are underneath the ruins. Her ashes read, "Trisha was once known as a healer, who dedicated her efforts to treating Misbegotten, Omen, and all those seen as impure. When her efforts failed, she was their companion as they died, watching over them to ensure that they could pass peacefully, free of pain, a tale akin to the origins of the Deathbed Companions." I don't know if Trisha herself was a follower of Miquella, but her story mirrors his, a quest to cure the incurable, eventually abandoned, for a more achievable goal. There is a statue that exists in a few places in the game, mostly at the Halig Tree, which I believe depicts the event that changed Miquella forever, the loss of Melania's right arm to the Scarlet Rot. Since the statue of Melania still has both legs, we know that this is the first limb that she has lost. Despite her missing arm, Melania seems to be the one comforting Miquella, who looks much more distraught by his posture. After this event, Miquella abandons the Golden Order completely and ventures out into the larger world with 3 purposes in mind: obtain new knowledge from outside the Golden Order, gather many followers, and cure his sister. Miquella looked in a variety of places in his quest for knowledge, but his main focus was undoubtedly on uncovering the mysteries of sorcery, and where better to start than Liurnia, home of Raya Lucaria Academy, Caria Manor, and also his half-sister Ranni, who may have taught him sorcery to begin with. There is a lily along the main northern road in Liurnia, suggesting that Miquella used the Lift of Dectus, and thus may have once possessed the Dectus Medallion. Miquella may have traveled to Raya Lucaria Academy, but it doesn't seem like he actually studied there. We know from the demi-human staff that the academics are scornful of those with new or dissenting ideas, and perhaps Rennala, Queen of Caria and mother of Ranni, knowing that Miquella was the son of her ex-husband and another woman, forbade him entrance. Rather than being any lilies in the Academy itself, there are instead 3 beneath the Academy, though the influences of St. Trina at least were felt within the Academy, as the isolated merchant above sells the Fever's Cookbook 2, which prominently shows a Miquella's lily on the front, just like all of the Fever's cookbooks. There's also a lily near the crystals north of Academy Crystal Cave. These crystals may have been of special interest to Miquella, as they help to magnify the power of sorcery. He may also have encountered Crystallians here for the first time, as some would later become his followers. Many Academy sorcerers would also become his followers, and one of them likely gave him a Glintstone Academy staff. This would introduce Miquella to the more official version of the spiral symbol and influence his own future staff creation. As Miquella was not welcome at the Academy, he needed a place in Liurnia to gather and study all of the knowledge that he had gained in his travels. This is why we find a lily at Converted Fringe Tower. Inside of the tower, we find a statue of Marika, along with thousands of books, scrolls, and scientific equipment. At the top of the tower, we find the spells Cannon of Haima and Gavel of Haima. The Sorceress Towers in Elden Ring are mostly, if not all, built by mages kicked out of the Academy of Raya Lucaria. So why do we find conspectus spells here, which are recognized by the Academy as being part of an official field of study? Probably because the Haima sorcerers were the ones most willing to leave the Academy. We know this from the Battle Mage Robes item, which states, whenever war broke out and the Academy sealed its gates, only Haima's scholars dared venture outside. Seclusion is no way to foster discovery, it is only a convenient form of escape. As Miquella was recruiting below the Academy, most followers he gained would probably have either been rejects from the Academy, or those belonging to the Haima Conspectus. There's another converted tower in Liurnia, the one in the south, and with no Miquella's lilies nearby. I believe that this tower was converted by somebody else, due to the lack of flowers. Perhaps the southern tower was converted by Radagon during his campaign in Liurnia. This might help explain why both towers require the erudition gesture to enter. After all, no Academy mage would ever use that gesture before a statue of Marika. Southeast of the tower, we can find 4 lilies in the Ul Palace ruins area. Miquella's search for the knowledge held by ancient religions inevitably led him to the ancestral followers. 3 of the lilies are right next to the stalwart horn charm, an item worn by ancestral followers to prevent frost and bleeding. This may have been a gift from the followers to Miquella, as he seemed intrigued by their beliefs about death and the afterlife. This won't be the last time we cross paths with the ancestral followers, so I'll talk more about their religion and why it so interested Miquella later. Miquella visited his half-sister Ranni at Caria Manor. There are 2 lilies on opposite sides of the inside of Caria Manor, next to no items of any significance, as well as 3 at Renna's Rise. Miquella may have met the Snow Witch Renna, who taught Ranni snow sorcery, but I have seen no evidence that Miquella ever used ice magic. I also see no evidence that Miquella used the portal here to visit Ainsel River deep underground. Strangely, in the area behind and east of Caria Manor, there's a group of graves with 5 lilies and a red wolf of Radagon. There are no other items nearby. Maybe this is Miquella's dog? I don't know. While at Caria Manor, Miquella also met Loretta, a powerful knight who invented bow sorceries, and she told him of the plight of the Albinaric people. Loretta would eventually become one of Miquella's fiercest supporters, as he promised to lead the Albinarics to a land of salvation. The full story of the Albinarics lies outside the scope of this video, but there is a Miquella's Lily at the Albinaric village. The right half of the Halig Tree medallion is also found there, held by the Albinaric elder Albus. I'm not sure if Miquella actually visited the village, though. Perhaps the flower and the medallion were left there by Loretta. Miquella does seem to have gone as far south as Gatetown Bridge, as there is a lily just south of the road there. If you pass this lily, you'll find a spirit spring, which sends you up to the highway lookout tower, where another lily can be found. On top of the tower, we find the Carian Glintblade Staff, which reads, "Staff embedded with a blue glintstone, one of 2 types of Carian staff. Gifted to enchanted knights, it enhances Glintblade sorceries." This staff also sports the spiral symbol, but the ring is further down. My theory is that this staff was created by Ranni and Miquella together at some point, which is why there are 2 Carian staffs. The Glintstone staff also bears this marked ring, which is the starting staff for the prisoner class, but also drops from wandering noble sorcerers. The prisoner's helm is clearly based on the helm forced onto the character Griffith from Berserk, a character that Miquella is at least partially inspired by. None of this is definitive proof that Miquella created these staves, but there are a few too many coincidences here for me to ignore. Another reason for the flower's position on the hill might be that it overlooks the sword memorial for Malenia's March, symbolic of Miquella watching over his sister. At some point, Miquella probably caught wind of the primeval current, an ancient source of unlimited knowledge and the inspiration for the creation of some of the most powerful sorceries in history. This is probably what the spiral symbol actually stands for, and it would later become the heart of Miquella's crest. In order to study the primeval current, Miquella would have to visit the mountaintops of the giants, and so he did. He took the lift of Rold, which again means that he may have at one point possessed the Rold medallion. In the mountains, he visited Heretical Rise, or just below it, where we can find 2 lilies. If Miquella did not know before, it was here that he discovered the truth of the primeval current. That infinite knowledge is too much for a mind to contain, and that those who study the primeval current are destined for insanity, death, or worse. Inside of Heretical Rise are many pale glintstones covered in soot. These may be crystals that fell from space, burning upon entering into the atmosphere, collected by heretical sorcerers who seek the knowledge of the stars. Perhaps it was from studying these crystals, or from the primeval current itself, that Miquella came to realize some of what it would actually take to accomplish his dreams, to find a land of salvation for all of the downtrodden peoples of the world, and to heal his sister. He would need an army of followers, access to a power that could control the fates of even the demigods, and blood, an ocean of blood. Before leaving the mountaintops of the giants, Miquella also visited Castle Sol. He was likely gifted the Ice Rind hatchet at this time, which he later re-gifted to the people of the Temple Quarter below Raya Lucaria, where 3 lilies can be found. Perhaps he did this in exchange for more followers interested in the primeval current, which he would need to achieve his goals. Since the hatchet was gifted to Miquella, it doesn't make much sense for him to have made it, but it does seem to fit the visual pattern of the other items we've seen so far very well. Miquella would visit Castle Sol again in the future, but first he set off to find his promised land, a place where he could take all of the outcasts of the world to live in peace and harmony. Using the Lift of Rold again, but this time passing through one of the Erdtree's many catacombs, an area that in the game is called the Hidden Path to the Halig Tree, Miquella may be the first or only person to attempt settling the consecrated snowfield beyond this passage, and he is probably the one who consecrated it. Most signs of human habitation here are related to Miquella in some way. There is a lily near the wandering caravan that contains St. Trina's torch. These caravans contain corpses that are being taken to catacombs for Erdtree burial. I believe this is symbolic of the eventual divergence in purpose between Miquella and St. Trina, as Miquella would soon develop a new power that would make his connection to St. Trina obsolete. Another lily is near the Stalwart Horn Charm +1, another place where Miquella made contact with the ancestral followers. 4 lilies can be found spread along the western cliffs of the snowfield, almost as though Miquella was tracing the edge of the land, looking out for the perfect spot to grow his holy tree. A place where everyone was welcome, and no one was shunned for the circumstances of their birth. A better Erdtree, with blackjack and hookers. Also, having chosen his location, Miquella founded the liturgical town of Ordina, which would serve as the gateway to his new domain, where we can find 6 lilies. The windows of Ordina sport the same flowering vine symbol that we saw all the way back at the capital. Also at Ordina, we find a Black Knife Assassin. Not an organization loyal to Miquella, but perhaps one that has overlapping interests. More on that later. The final 4 lilies in the consecrated snowfield are found near Albinaric Rise, 3 of which are located on a corpse. It's here that we must finally face the truth of what Miquella was doing by choosing to pursue the primeval current, the creation of schools of graven mages. These horrifying amalgamations of multiple sorcerers are the final result of studying the primeval current. There are 3 such enemies near the Glintstone Craftsman's Cookbook 8, which suggests that Miquella brought many sorcerers from the Academy to help with his experiments. There's also a dead school of graven mages atop the tower, surrounded by crystals. This is a likely result of his early experiments attempting to synthesize unalloyed gold, which I'll talk about more later. We also find the Graven Mass Talisman here, which reads, a talisman depicting the first school of graven mages, a nightmare that would continue to haunt the Academy. The primeval current is a forbidden tradition of glintstone sorcery. To those who cleave to its teachings, the acts of collecting sorcerers to fashion them into the seeds of stars is but another path of scientific inquiry. Miquella was either creating these abominations on purpose, or he simply viewed them as acceptable losses. Miquella began the process of growing the Halig Tree, as well as potentially building the fortress of Elphial at its base. I don't know if the tree or the fortress existed first. Elphial is known as the brace of the Halig Tree, so perhaps it was built later on in order to support the growth of the tree. This location may have been little more than a barren island before the tree was planted. 15 lilies can be found near the base of the Halig Tree, strewn throughout a graveyard where both Kindred of Rot and Halig Tree soldiers tend the graves. But growing the Halig Tree would have taken a very long time, and Miquella needed to find a way to speed up the process. He also didn't have enough time to wait for the tree to grow, as he had yet to find a way to save his sister. At some point, either before or after he started growing the Halig Tree, Miquella journeyed to the land of Caelid. His primary purpose there was to visit his half-brother Radahn, but while in Caelid, Miquella would discover the key to achieving all of his ambitions. There are no Miquella's lilies in Limgrave, and I think that this is because Miquella has never been to Limgrave, probably because there's no one in Limgrave that Miquella would have any interest in visiting. So he probably took a boat to get to Caelid. That might sound like a weird thing to say, as boats aren't exactly plentiful in Elden Ring, but there are depictions of large ships with 3 masts on the map, as well as small rowboats. I think it's just that they've all been sunk by the time the events of the game take place. Some of these wrecks can even still be seen from Radahn's boss arena. The lily at the Minor Erd Tree in northwest Caelid is one potential landing point, but whatever his approach, visiting the Minor Erd Trees was one of Miquella's objectives by this point in his journey, as he needed more information about how the trees grew in order to help with growing his own. Not far south of this Minor Erd Tree is the Forsaken Ruins, where the Sword of Trina can be found. There is no Miquella's lily here, but there are 6 Trina's lilies, as well as a nascent butterfly on the Rot View balcony above the ruins. It's almost like Miquella threw away the Sword of St. Trina from the balcony, perhaps another sign of his imminent discovery. As he journeyed through Caelid, Miquella continued to pick up many different types of followers. West of the main road in western Caelid, there is Lily surrounded by a group of eclectic enemies just kind of hanging out together. Radahn soldiers, noble sorcerers, and even a mad pumpkin head. Also nearby is the Streets of Sage's Ruins, where the Perfumer Traveler set can be found. These items all read, "An associate of a healer. He is said to be in search of new aromatics and flower gardens, in hopes of treating misbegotten, omen, and all those seen as impure." Whoever's clothes these are, they clearly knew Trisha, and I think that their location here on a corpse is symbolically fitting. The Perfumers had been Miquella's earliest followers, but they had also likely grown apart from him in the time since, perhaps due to Miquella's slow descent into unchecked human experimentation. There's also a lily at the Dragon Communion Shrine. Miquella probably came here to investigate whether the power of dragons could be useful to him, but he doesn't seem to have gotten much out of it. I don't think Miquella invested very many points into Arcane, which is necessary to use dragon incantations. Also, Miquella doesn't really seem the type to go around slaying dragons. There's a lily on the road leading to Redmane Castle, and another situated in the graveyard behind the castle. We know from the final cutscene in the DLC that Miquella and Radahn made some sort of vow to each other. This might not have happened at this time, but at the very least Miquella seems to have gone to Radahn to either establish or rekindle friendly relations. North up the road from Redmane Castle, in eastern Caelid, Miquella also visited Sellia, Town of Sorcery, where 2 lilies can be found. Sellia is a town where the outcasts of Raya Lucaria Academy gather, and invisible sorceries were being developed, perhaps in order to exact revenge. It's also the third and last place that I'm aware of that has the flowering vine symbols on the windows like Lanedale and Ordina. One lily is right next to an imbued sword key. This is actually important, but we'll circle back to it later. The other is near the Night Comet sorcery, which reveals that Sellian sorcerers were assassins, and it is often said that they hunted their fellows. While there, Miquella likely learned the sorcery's unseen form and unseen blade, which he later hid atop Mirage Rise and Altus Plateau, where a lily and a spirit spring are present. Also in Sellia, we find the Staff of Loss. If we look closely at this staff, you might notice that this is literally the Carrion Glintblade staff, but with the Glintblade torn out, complete with the silver ring with the Primeval Current symbol. Perhaps Miquella gifted this staff to the town of Sellia in exchange for their knowledge of stealth sorceries. There are also 2 lilies south of Sellia Hideaway. This could indicate that Miquella made contact with the sorcerer Lusat or the Crystallians that reside there, but the flowers are further away from the hideaway than most flowers are to their relevant items. These flowers could also be an indication that Miquella once visited the entrance to the city of FROMSOFTWARE, which once may have floated above what is now Radahn's boss arena. The leftover architecture in the area suggests that some sort of bridge or entryway to the ancient city was once located here. However, there are no items in the actual FROMSOFTWARE that relate directly to Miquella that I could find. Miquella seems to have spent quite a bit of time in Dragon Barrow. There is another lily at the end of the road, north of the bridge guarded by a knight's cavalry. This is another potential place that Miquella might have come and gone from Caelid via boat. There are 4 lilies at the Minor Erd Tree to the southeast, where Miquella likely conducted extensive research for the Haley Tree. And there is also a lily at Linnaeus Rise. Linnaeus Rise is a fascinating location. The outside of the tower is strewn with blue crystals and is locked with a puzzle, similar to all the other rises associated with Miquella. But unlike the other towers, here the statue that allows the puzzle to be solved has been smashed, forever blocking the entrance. The only way to gain entrance to the tower is by using the nearby spirit spring. Miquella sealed this tower so that none could enter but he. Why? The tower is full of books, but many are strewn about the floor as well as packed onto the shelves. At the top of the tower is a memory stone, which is the standard item that is most often found in Sorcerer's Rises. The unique feature of this tower is located down on the ground floor, just inside the permanent seal placed upon the entrance, a graven mage school, surrounded by charred yellow crystals, similar to those in Heretical Rise, only these are larger, more developed, and contain within veins of golden light. I think it is here, in this spot, where Miquella finally cracked the code. He found a way to create these golden crystals using knowledge from the primeval current, and this in turn led him to the creation of unalloyed gold. I don't know if these crystals are necessary as a material to make unalloyed gold, or if creating them was merely one step in the process, but Miquella finally had what he needed to hold his sister's scarlet rod. Unalloyed gold is both a substance and a type of incantation created by Miquella, though we do not learn any unalloyed gold incantations in the game itself. The unalloyed gold needle is surely among the earliest of Miquella's unalloyed gold creations. The needle reads, "A ritual implement crafted to ward away the meddling of outer gods. It is thought capable of forestalling the incurable rotting sickness." But even this was not enough to truly cure Malenia. Nor even was the defeat of the avatar of the god of rot, a giant scorpion later sealed by Malenia and her swordmaster. Miquella would go on to create many weapons and armor out of unalloyed gold. The Halig Tree Helm, Halig Tree Knight Helm, and Sacred Crown Helm are all adorned with unalloyed gold braids, again reminiscent of the primeval current spiral. The Halig Tree Crest Great Shield is adorned with an unalloyed gold depiction of the Halig Tree itself. All of Malenia's gear was made by Miquella and consecrated to resist rot. The Hand of Malenia, Malenia's winged helm, Malenia's armor, Malenia's gauntlets, and Malenia's greaves. The Miquella Knight's sword is specifically stated to be made by Miquella's followers, which is why it itself is not made of unalloyed gold. It is also said to be based on the Carian Knight sword, again suggestive of a positive relationship between the two factions. Sometime either before or after his creation of unalloyed gold, Miquella realized that it wouldn't be enough to fully cure his sister. It could prevent further damage, but it would not return to Malenia the limbs that she had already lost, nor would it enable Miquella to grow to proper adulthood. He needed something else, something that would enable him to manipulate the bodily structure of a demigod. Miquella needed to learn about blood magic, and there was only one person who he knew to turn to: Mohg. While Miquella has spent the majority of his story on a quest to ward off the influences of outer gods, Mohg had done quite the opposite. While imprisoned under Lanedale Capital, Mohg had come face to face with an outer god known as the Formless Mother. The Blood Boon incantation reads, "The Mother of Truth craves wounds. When Mohg stood before her, deep underground, his accursed blood erupted with fire, and besotted with the defilement that he was born into." Mohg and Miquella had a meeting. The details here are very obscure, and I don't know who arranged the meeting, nor do I know the full motivations of either party for having it. But I know that the meeting took place at Wraithblood Ruins in Altus Plateau. Here we can find a Miquella's lily, as well as a nascent butterfly, and also a second lily below the cliff. But there's also something else here. Something new. The Sacramental Bud crafting material, which reads, "An immature bud containing fresh blood, believed to originate long ago from a strain of buds cultivated with youthful, sacramental blood." By my count, there are 83 of these, and yeah, we're gonna visit all of them. It seems that anywhere that these plants are present is a place where Miquella has actually shed blood. There are 11 of these at the Wraithblood Ruins, and I believe that this is the place where the original strain was cultivated. The giant skeletal slime here is likely also a remnant of whatever experiments Miquella and Mohg may have performed. However it was that the meeting started, I think it ended with Mohg attacking Miquella, potentially with a bloody helix also found at the Wraithblood Ruins, which reads, "Ominous piercing sword with a winding blade, carried by the noble servants of the Lord of Blood, designed to bore into flesh, causing severe blood loss at the wound. The extracted blood trickles gracefully down the length of the blade. The reason that I think this happened is due to where Sacramental Blood is found. Almost all Sacramental Blood is concentrated within just a few areas which are all very important to Miquella. The exception to this is Mount Gelmir, where many patches of 3 to 4 buds can be found all over the mountain. I think this indicates that Miquella was forced to flee Mohg at the ruins and head up the mountain. These many patches are often found in secluded spots off the side of the road, as though these are places where Miquella stopped to change his bloody bandages. Miquella even seems to have lost a few drops of blood off of the mountain, as there is a lone bud near the entrance to the shaded castle. As we proceed up the mountain from the Bridge of Iniquity, we find a group of 3 buds off the side of the road, followed by another group of 4. This group is right next to the Corpse Stench Shack, where the player is invaded by Anastasia, Tarnished Eater. Miquella's trip to the mountain probably predates Anastasia's presence here, but the Golden Vow incantation is found in the shack on a corpse that could belong to a follower of Miquella's. I think that before the Shattering, the topography of Mount Gelmir was a little bit different. The bridge, which is now broken and impassable, was likely intact, and the many ladders that adorn the eastern side of the mountain might not have existed yet. Miquella does not appear to have stopped to study the minor air tree of Mount Gelmir. This might be because he was still being pursued by the forces of Mohg, or perhaps because the minor air tree was already dead, as we see it in the game. Across the bridge and down the road lies another patch of 3 Sacramental buds. This spot is interesting because the buds appear to be growing out of a pile of burnt corpses. There is an event referenced only a few times in the lore known as the Assault on Volcano Manor. The sword memorial on Mount Gelmir for this event reads, "The squalid, the sick, the blasphemous. A wretched, unending war with no glory." Logically, Miquella's journey to Mount Gelmir should have taken place before the Shattering, so the Sacramental Blood here should predate the pile of corpses. I am not sure if this is meant to mean something or not. Finally, there's another patch of 4 Sacramental Bud tucked behind the entrance to Volcano Manor. I gave quite a bit of thought to what path the Sacramental Bud seems to indicate Miquella traveled. If the bud does indeed form a path, then Miquella somehow went from the front gate of Volcano Manor down to Seathwater River below. There's no items inside of Volcano Manor to suggest that Miquella was there for very long, but the placement of the lilies and buds makes it seem unlikely that he was simply turned away either. I think the best explanation for this is that Miquella was allowed into Volcano Manor and then almost immediately thrown into the subterranean Inquisition chamber, which he then escaped via Abductor Virgin. This puts Miquella at Windham Ruins, where another patch of 4 Sacramental Bud is located. There's also one bud on the cliff edge below the ruins and above Sage's Cave. Sage's Cave may very well be an important location as well, but we will circle back to that. It was here that Miquella had a choice to make. Either take the path back down to Erdtree Gazing Hill and be done with Mount Gelmir, or travel up Seathwater River and circle the mountain one more time. We have yet to pass a single lily on the mountain thus far, but now that changes. Still bleeding everywhere, but more slowly now, Miquella continues north up the river to Seathwater Cave, where we find our first lily. This cave is being guarded by Lanedale soldiers even by the time of the game. Inside, we can find the Mushroom Armor set and the Kindred of Rot's Exaltation Talisman. The Mushroom set reads, "To those enraptured by the Scarlet Rot, these overgrown mushrooms are holy vestments that root one to the earth." And the Talisman reads, "Rot for the Scarlet Goddess. O scarlet blossoms, flourish in distant lands and return to us, the unwanted children." Amongst the servants of Rot and Kindred of Rot, there is a religion which venerates the Scarlet Rot, and by extension also Malenia. Miquella seems to have been more than willing to use this for his own advancement. After passing Seathwater Terminus, Miquella stopped to change his bandages at Fort Lade, where we find 4 more Sacramental Bud. He must not have been very popular with the fire monks, though, as there's no lilies anywhere near the fort. The next lily is to the south, near the lava field where the magma worm resides. This flower is very hidden, so I'm not quite sure what to make of its location. Next, we find another lily at the Craftsman Shack, along with the pulley crossbow. It seems that Miquella used his time on Mount Gelmir to hone his craftsmanship and develop the process for making unalloyed gold weapons and armor. The crossbow reads, "Made with pulleys and power springs. The complex mechanism, which requires advanced mathematical and mechanical understanding to craft, was likely made by a certain genius who learned Golden Order fundamentalism." Here we can see the transition taking place, and Miquella begins to replace the silver of his earlier craftsmanship with intricate parts made of the pale, unalloyed gold. Continuing up the hill, we find 2 Sacramental Blood near a unique malfunctioning abductor virgin enemy. This enemy is missing its head and has a unique moveset used by no other enemy in the base game. Maybe this is meant to be an abductor that Miquella modified in order to make his escape from Volcano Manor. Although for it to get here specifically, it would have had to chase Miquella all the way around the mountain. That sounds funny, so I'm going with that. There's also 4 more buds near Hermit Village. None of the items here seem directly connected to Miquella, but he may have visited one or even several prominent sorcerers, including Primeval Sorcerer Azul, Errant Sorcerer Wilhelm, or other members of the Herodes Conspectus who engage in nomadic study away from the Academy. Across the Natural Rock Bridge and past the Gelmir hero's grave, we can find another lily and a patch of 3 Sacramental buds near the pulley bow. The bow reads, Longbow, which utilizes a series of pulleys and strings. The complex mechanism, which requires blah 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 blah, Golden Ore fundamentalism. Looking at the bow, we can see that Miquella has now graduated to making weapons entirely out of unalloyed gold, never to return to his former craftsmanship style. Across one more Natural Rock Bridge, we reach the final Miquella's Lily on Mount Gelmir. At least one ladder must have existed in this area at the time, as we can find a singular Sacramental bud higher up on the mountain, as well as a patch of 4 near an interesting little set piece, where 4 marionette soldiers surround a Lanedale knight and turn him into a pincushion. Maybe this is a representation of Miquella overstaying his welcome on the mountain and finally being ejected by the forces of his half-brother Rykard. This concludes the Trail of Blood. All remaining Sacramental buds are confined to just a few specific areas. After finally returning to Altus Plateau, the first thing Miquella probably did was attempt to use his newfound blood powers to heal his sister. There is a secluded area with 10 Sacramental buds northeast of Altus Highway Junction. The buds surround a statue of Miquella and Malenia, along with many land octopuses, a creature that requires human blood in order to reproduce. The statue looks very old and worn down, unlike the identical statues found at the Halig Tree. I think this might indicate that this is the original statue, while the other ones are copies. At the foot of the statue, we find the Amber Starlight key item, which reads, An ephemeral sliver that gives off a pale amber glow, what remains of a passing flash of starlight. If the stars command our fates, then amber-hued stars must command the fates of the gods. Such is the belief that inspired the use of these shards to prepare a most special draught, cannot be consumed by mere humans. The practice of turning starlight into potions that turn people into dolls is something that originated in the ancient cities of Nokron and Noxtella, but this item's presence here is more of a symbolic parallel. Just as Preceptor Saluvis needs the amber starlight to make a potion that can control the fate of a demigod, Miquella required the golden rocks that fell from the sky to fashion devices capable of affecting said fates. Maybe the golden cracks in the stones at Linnea's Rise and the amber starlight are one and the same. At some point, Miquella returned to Caelid in order to make some sort of pact with the Kindred of Rot. There are 16 Sacramental buds at the Church of the Plague where we find the character Millicent. There's also a lily not far from the Caelid Waypoint Ruins where the Kindred of Rot birthing grounds is located. This event may have been as simple as Miquella donating his blood in order to secure the allegiance of the Kindred, or may have been as complex as Miquella himself being partially responsible for endowing the Kindred with the level of intelligence that we see them possess in the game. Also at the ruins is the Meteoric Ore Blade. This weapon's description has no connection to Miquella, but if you look at the handle, it bears a striking resemblance to unalloyed gold. There are 3 more spots in Caelid with Sacramental blood, but all of these 3 are found on corpses, suggesting that these might be traitors who tried to steal Miquella's blood and paid the price for it. Finally, there are only 5 Sacramental buds at the Halig Tree, also all held by corpses. This is probably because Miquella used his blood to grow the Halig Tree itself, which left little to grow flowers. Now Miquella had everything that he had wanted: an army of followers, the power of unalloyed gold, and blood magic that could grow his tree to unknown heights. Miquella retreated to his sanctuary, and he stayed there, until a visitor came calling. A set of 2 fingers arrived at the Halig Tree to deliver a message. Miquella and Malenia had both been named Empyrean, which gave them a valid claim to the Elden throne. We see this in the cutscene at the end of the DLC. The chair Miquella kneels in front of is the same one we find Malenia sitting in at the Halig Tree roots. By this point, Miquella had come far in his growth of the Halig Tree, and had no desire to return to the Erd Tree. But, if he was to become a god, He wanted Radahn to be his consort. Because Malenia was also an Empyrean, she could not become his consort herself. Before that, Miquella had one lifelong aspiration that he had not yet achieved, one desire that remained unfulfilled. He wanted to rid himself and his sister of their curses for good. Nothing that he had tried had ever worked. Not faith, not sorcery, not blood magic, not even fate manipulation had done more than forestall the inevitable. Their curses seemed inseparable from the bodies that they had been born into. But what if the body could be left behind? What if the physical flesh, along with the curse that inhabits it, could be cast aside, allowing the soul to move to another vessel? As it turns out, Miquella was not the only Empyrean having these kinds of thoughts, and his half-sister Lunar Princess Ranni was already way ahead of him. Actually, she wasn't the only one. A plot had been brewing amongst the demigods that, once enacted, would bring an end to the Age of the Erdtree. A plot to kill Godwyn the Golden. Who all participated in the planning of this event is still somewhat obscured, but we know that Ranni is the one who slew Godwyn using the ancient rite known as the Curse Mark of Death. This key item reads, Curse Mark carved into the discarded flesh of Ranni the Witch, also known as the half-wheel wound of the centipede. This curse mark was carved at the moment of death of the first demigod, and should have taken the shape of a circle. However, 2 demigods perished at the same time, breaking the curse mark into 2 half-wheels. Ranni was the first of the demigods whose flesh perished, while the Prince of Death perished in soul alone. Ranni's soul would then inhabit a doll made in the likeness of the Snow Witch Renna, while Godwyn's body would fester and grow out of control like some sort of invasive fungus spreading across the lands between. Marika herself may also have been involved in the death of Godwyn. As the Black Knife armor reads, the assassins that carried out the deeds of the Knight of Black Knives were all women, and rumored to be Newmen who had close ties with Marika herself. In order to kill Godwyn, Ranni needed part of the Rune of Death, which was held by Marika's shadow, Malekith the Black Blade. His remembrance reads, Malekith was a shadow-bound beast given to his Empyrean. Marika's sole need of her shadow was a vessel to lock away destined death. Even then, she betrayed him. The Blasphemous Claw item even implies that Rykard was involved somehow, but the wording is too confusing to give us any actual useful information. So, the question that I want to ask is, did Miquella participate in the planning of the Knight of Black Knives? There's no direct evidence that he was involved, but there are several connections between areas associated with Miquella and the Black Knives. The converted Fringe Tower is situated almost directly above the Black Knife Catacombs, where the Black Knife print item is found. This might not be incredibly significant, but if Miquella wanted to send a message to the Black Knives from his base of operations in Liurnia, all he would have to do is chuck it off the cliff. More significantly, half of the Black Knife assassins in the entire game can be found in Ordina Liturgical Town. 3 invisible assassins inside the Everjail and 1 crouched under the bridge near the cliff. There's also a Black Knife assassin in Sage's Cave, which I mentioned earlier. This assassin holds the Concealing Veil Talisman, which reads, Talisman put together from dark cloth with a lustrous sheen, part of one of the concealing veils used by the assassins on the Knight of Black Knives. Sage's Cave also has several other things that interest us, including a second boss, Necromancer Garrus. He wields the oddly shaped family head's flail, which, if we look closer, appears to be made of silver and unalloyed gold. But why would Miquella have made this random necromancer a weapon? Well, because of ancient knowledge, of course. The skill of family heads is called Familiar Rancor, and the Rancor Call incantation just happens to read, Sorcery of the Servants of Death. Once thought lost, this ancient death hex was rediscovered by the necromancer Garrus. We can also find the Candle Tree wooden shield here, inside a chest, right next to one that contains a nascent butterfly. The shield reads, thought to represent a surreptitious prophecy of cardinal sin. The lit candle tree design was forbidden. This candle tree symbol is also likely from another ancient religion, though I don't entirely know what it stands for. Miquella probably does, though, because once again we can see that this symbol is a prominent part of his personal crest. If I had to guess, the prophecy is probably something like, when the Erdtree inevitably grows old and dies, it should be burned so that the new life can arise from the ashes of the old. Something like that. The real reason I think that Miquella may have been involved in the Knight of Black Knives is because of what he did after it. The Golden Epitaph Straight Sword reads, a sword made to commemorate the death of Godwyn the Golden, first of the demigods to die, infused with the humble prayer of a young boy, "O brother, Lord brother, please die a true death." Miquella returned to the mountaintops of the giants to revisit Castle Sol. His purpose there was to get the inhabitants of the castle to cause a solar eclipse. This eclipse would have either returned Godwin's soul to the lands between, or granted him true death. The details seem unclear, but the eclipse never actually took place, as we learn from the spirit atop Castle Sol, who says, "Lord Miquella, forgive me. The sun has not been swallowed. Our prayers were lacking. Your comrade remains soulless. I will never set my eyes upon it now, your divine Halig tree." I think that Miquella did this not out of kindness, but out of guilt. He knew that Godwin was going to die, and he did nothing to intervene, because he wanted to know, potentially even more than Ronnie, what happens if a demigod dies. While at Castle Sol, Miquella likely met Commander Niall and gave him the left half of the Halig Tree Medallion. Niall drops the Veteran's Prosthesis weapon, which reads, "Commander Niall, veteran of Castle Sol, offered this prosthesis in exchange for the lives of the defeated knights held prisoner. He went on to lead these men as an army of no nation." This is actually a confirmed mistranslation. It should read that Niall gave up his leg, not the prosthesis. There is a small possibility that Niall lost his leg in a confrontation with Miquella. If we look at the prosthesis, we can see that part of it might be made of silver, but it's rather tarnished, and there's definitely no unalloyed gold here. The blade itself seems to be made of a meteorite or something similar. But between this and the meteoric ore blade, Miquella might just have had a side hobby making weapons from space metal. Sometime after the death of Godwin, Marika took her hammer and smashed the Elden Ring, breaking it into the many great runes which would eventually be distributed amongst the other demigods. This event came to be known as the Shattering, and it kicked off a series of wars which saw the demigods vie for power and control of the Air Tree. Miquella sent Malenia on a march to Caelid to confront Radahn. To outsiders, this was merely a move to defeat a strong adversary, but Miquella had secretly told Malenia to deliver a message to Radahn. "Miquella awaits thee, O promised consort." Miquella may have done this to conceal their potential alliance from the other demigods. But, whatever his intentions, something happened that Miquella had not planned for. Something that would destroy all of his plans in an instant. The snapping of a needle. What broke the needle is uncertain. It may have simply broken in the heat of battle, but some of the dialogue at the end of the NPC Millicent's questline implies otherwise. She says, "There is something I must return to Malenia. The will that was once her own, the dignity, the sense of self that allowed her to resist the call of the Scarlet Rot, the pride she abandoned to meet Radahn's measure." Malenia may have willfully broken the needle in order to gain greater strength in her fight against Radahn, her personal pride overcoming her loyalty to her brother and his goals. In either case, the needle broke and the Scarlet Aeonia flowered, laying waste to central Caelid and driving Radahn insane with Scarlet Rot. To me, it seems that Miquella never forgave Malenia for this event, as he seems to have abandoned his sister by the events of the base game, and he never mentions her at all in the DLC. I think that over time, he began to see Malenia just as he saw all of his other followers. No longer downtrodden souls to be saved, but instead tools to be used for his own aspirations. Miquella's signature item is called the Bewitching Branch. Crafting it requires 1 Sacramental Bud and 1 Miquella's Lily. It reads, "Tree branch, blessed with an incantation of unalloyed gold. Pierce a foe, using FP to turn them into a temporary ally. The Empyrean Miquella is loved by many people. Indeed, he has learned very well how to compel such affection." The Cleanrot armor, worn by all of Malenia's followers, reads, "The Cleanrot Knights vowed to fight alongside Malenia, despite the inevitable, if gradual, putrefaction of their flesh. Their acceptance of their fate made these battle fiercest of all." They vowed, it says, and yet if we look at the armor, there is a suspicious branch stuck right into the armpit. Miquella clearly compelled the allegiance that these knights were so renowned for, and I can't help but wonder just how much of the kindness that Miquella was known for was really as described. Miquella needed an entirely new plan now, one that would rectify the mistake that his sister had made. But before I talk about that, we have some cleaning up to do. Let's talk about the ancestral followers one more time. Miquella seems to have spent quite a lot of time studying them, and yet he never really learned from them what he wanted to. I think that the followers were distrustful of Miquella. Otherwise, they would have given him the knowledge of the immunizing horn charm along with the stalwart one of the few items in the game not associated with Miquella that increases resistance to scarlet rot. Miquella was left to merely imitate their ways, rather than learning their closely guarded secrets. There's a weapon in the Tombsward Ruins in the Weeping Peninsula near a patch of Trina's lilies called the Winged Scythe, which reads, "Sacred scythe resembling a pair of white wings. According to pagan belief, white-winged maidens are said to be death's gentle envoys." I'm pretty sure Miquella made this weapon. It appears to be made of unalloyed gold, and the pagans mentioned are likely the ancestral followers. The winged great horn weapon that they wield reads, "In the ancestral spirit-worshipping faith, these are considered envoys' wings, made to reap the lives of beings which experience no sprouting." The design of the winged scythe also looks like it was inspired by the great horn hammer, another ancestral follower weapon. Now let's knock out the remaining Miquella's lilies. There are 3 lilies at the back of Shaded Castle. These were probably planted by Malay Marais, the ex-ruler of Shaded Castle, as he has an obsession with Melania that borders on worship. There's no reason to think that Miquella actually went here. There are also lilies at 2 of the 3 sword memorials in Altus Plateau, one for the Second Defensive Lanedale and one for the Ancient Dragon War. There's no lily near the memorial for the First Defensive Lanedale. The best I've got for this is that maybe Miquella was present for the Dragon War, which would have taken place long before the Shattering, and for the Second Defensive Lanedale, but not for the first, both of which would have happened after the Shattering. In Liurnia, there are 2 lilies in Jarburg. I don't see any significant connection between Miquella and Jarburg, but if he was there, it probably would have been back when the road was still intact and Jarburg was more easily accessible. Maybe Miquella used Jarburg as a port to move from Liurnia to Caelid and back. There's also a lily down the hill from the Church of Inhibition. This flower is very close to where you get invaded by festering fingerprint Vike. My best guess for the meaning of this is that maybe Miquella and Vike knew each other. That is possible. And now the only 4 remaining lilies are those related to Miquella's new scheme. Instead of ascending to the Elden throne to become the Erdtree's new puppet, Miquella would attain godhood the same way that Marika had, by passing through the Gate of Divinity. But to do this, he would need to find a way to travel to the Lands of Shadow, and then once he was there, he would have to break the seal protecting the gate. As he no longer had his sister and her fearsome undefeated army to do his bidding, Miquella decided to set a trap set for a person who had the power that he needed, Mohg. But Miquella wasn't strong enough to defeat Mohg in a head-on confrontation, so he would need someone else to do the dirty work for him. This is where the Tarnished come in, or in other words, the player. Miquella knew that the Lost Grace would eventually cause great warriors to return to the Lands Between, seeking the Great Runes and the Elden Ring. He would partially seal himself inside of the Halig Tree and then cast aside his physical body, using a related rite to the one that Ranni had used on herself and Godwyn. Then, he would use his discarded body to bait Mohg into kidnapping him from the Halig Tree. Once the Tarnished defeat Mohg, he would use Mohg's power to form a bridge to the Lands of Shadow and then use Mohg's corpse as material to resurrect Radahn to become his consort. So, he strategically placed the items that the Tarnished would need in order to defeat Mohg. One of the last remaining Miquella's lilies is at the 4 belfries, just below the portal that goes to the Chapel of Anticipation, where the player starts their journey. Here, we can find a nascent butterfly that baits you into killing yourself if you return here via the portal, and also the Tarnished Wizen's Finger, which reads, "A finger of corpse wax, so emaciated the bone is visible. It is a relic of those who came before, left to help those who would come after." There are 2 lilies behind Fort Faroth in Caelid, where we find the right half of the Decnus Medallion, as well as a lily underneath Fort Gale, where the left half is found. And, with that, we have finally visited all of the Miquella's lilies in this godforsaken game. Sorry, I love this game, but this shit took way too long. Yeah, okay, I lied. That's not where the left half of the Decnus Medallion is. But I feel like it should be there. Quick tangent. If we look at Fort Height, where the left half is actually located, there are a number of things that strike me as odd. The first is that 8 blood roses that grow in the courtyard. This item reads, "Blood-slick roses that bloom in festering blood, particularly beloved by those who serve the Lord of Blood. Glory to his inevitable reign." This item is associated with Moog in a very similar way that Miquella's lilies are related to Miquella. Also inside the fort, we find the Nomadic Warriors Cookbook 6, which allows us to craft 2 different types of blood grease, 2 different types of bloodbone arrow, and the bloodbone bolt, all of which use the blood rose in their creation. Finally, there is a Godric Knight atop the fort who uses and drops the Bloody Slash Ash of War, which reads, Blood Oath skill granted by the Lord of Blood. From a low stance, coat the blade in your own blood to unleash a rending blood slash in a wide arc. Why is this fort full of Moog-associated items? I'm not sure, but I think Moog is also responsible for the Dectus Medallion half being here, rather than at Fort Gale. Maybe he moved it to a place where he could more easily post men loyal to him to guard it. I'm not sure. Anyway, though. To Ranni, Miquella gave the Spirit Calling Bell, to give to a Tarnished of Promise when they appear. The Spectral Steed Whistle, which, by the way, looks like it might be made of unalloyed gold, and the Rolled Medallion Miquella gave to his sister Melina. Melina is a very mysterious character who acts as our primary guide in the Lands Between. She is the daughter of Marika, and we know from the Mesmer's Kindling item from the DLC that she is Mesmer's sister, but we don't know who either of their fathers are. Mesmer's red hair seems to suggest Radagon, but his name starting with an M suggests Godfrey. In any case, reference to these two in the lore of the base game are very rare. The existence of both seems to be a carefully guarded secret in the Lands Between, likely because of their association with fire, which doesn't mix too well with trees. Having left the most important items the Tarnished would need in the most appropriate places, Miquella returned to the Halig Tree and sealed himself inside. Then, cut his own soul loose from his physical body, and with that, the trap was set. All Miquella had to do was wait for Moog to abscond with his body and then get himself killed by the Tarnished. Once this part of the plan succeeded, he would need to accomplish other objectives in the Lands of Shadow, but this is the end of the story that I wanted to tell. Here's one final interesting thing to consider. Of all of the demigods that we defeat for their great runes, Godric, Rennala, Radahn, Morgott, Rykard, Malenia, and Moog, only Radahn and Moog do not leave behind any kind of corpse in the boss arena after being defeated. All of the other demigods leave behind some kind of body after their defeat, except Rennala, who remains alive. But Radahn and Moog leave behind nothing, perhaps because Miquella had plans for them. If you made it this far, then thank you for watching. When I made a 30-second video pointing out the Miquella's Lily behind Redmane Castle, I had no idea what kind of rabbit hole I was about to fall down. Some guy in the comments argued with me very adamantly that the Miquella's Lilies were placed randomly for gameplay reasons and do not have any lore implications. Yeah, that kind of annoyed me, so I decided to dig a little bit deeper, and I found way more than I was expecting to. If you are that guy and you watched this whole video, please leave me a comment and tell me what you think. Do you still think that the flowers have no lore implications? In fact, that goes for everyone. If you disagree with one of my theories, or if you know about something relevant that I overlooked, please leave it in a comment. Discovering the lore of these games has always been a community-driven activity, and I honestly don't even think we've come that close to cracking the code on this game's story. This video is just a look at one character. Half a character even, given that I was wearing blinders preventing me from looking directly at St. Trina for this entire video. I even think that the follow the flowers methodology can be applied to other characters as well. Moog, for instance, with the blood roses. Oh, okay, the video's over now. I'm going back to making short videos that I can finish in an afternoon, because devoting... In the script it says a month, but no, more than a month of my life to this fucking project was a huge pain in the ass. Honestly, not worth it. You never know, though. I might be up for torturing myself again like this one day. Peace.